Now, ladies and gentlemen, this short video is going to be to help people understand what the fundamentals of communism really is. Marxism and communism are made so unclear to so many people. The Communist Manifesto, like much of Marx's works, leaves so much room for different interpretations that you might never actually get to the bottom of what he was trying to say, until you come across points like this that make it much easier for people to understand, because we need to cut philosophy out of it and just go with the facts. So what I have here are 10 points in the Communist Manifesto, and this is in chapter 2, named Proletarians and Communists. And the point that I'm making with this video, there's a couple of points I'm making with it, but whenever I write or make anything concerning Marx, I use the term all roads lead to communism, because whether he's looking at someone else's philosophy or he's ending one of his own so-called philosophies, it's always the same conclusion. All roads lead to communism. That's it. Do not pass go. Whether he's looking at Darwin or he's looking at Hegel, he's going to either agree with them or contradict them in a way that eventually leads back to the road that is communism. So I'll just read you some of this and point out some fundamental important points. I've got a couple of notes on here, but the 10 points here are really all you need when it comes to understanding the problem of communism and the manifesto itself. And let's remember, communists will try and sell something called primitive communism, as if to suggest communism existed before the likes of Marx and the manifesto and so on. They will try and basically steal other people's philosophies or societies and say that this was primitive communism. No. The manifesto is what makes it communism. That's why socialism is not the same as communism, because communism has a list of rules to follow. Socialism, you might change them here and there. So here we go. Chapter 2, Proletarians and Communists. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. Right? Nevertheless, in most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. And what, in my belief, he's saying here is, if you can't get all these done, do what you can and do as much damage as you possibly can as quickly as you can in case someone stops you. Okay, so number one, and make no mistake about this, because in the manifesto, Marx or Engels, whoever happens to be writing, because they say it was mainly Marx, but Engels was also involved heavily. They both authored the manifesto. He will claim that why would we need to abolish the workers' private property? The industry has already done that. But then he doesn't really go on to say that he won't do it. He just sort of says that the industry has already done it. So number one, abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Now, it's not saying there that it's bourgeois land, because that's what he tries to claim in the manifesto. Bourgeois private property. Well, bourgeois or petty bourgeois, which are small shop owners, people like that, technically it's anyone who makes a pound note. Anyone who steps above normality and makes a bit of money. They enter that bourgeois system. So what he's saying is, anyone who's got something of their own that they've earned, take it from them. That's what he's saying here. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Number two, a heavy, progressive or graduated income tax. Number three. Now, number three really rolls into number four. Number three, abolition of all rights of inheritance. So, not only can you not create your own legacy, you can't leave anything behind for your family to be proud of and to celebrate you and that legacy after you. Thus, one's individuality, everything about what makes you entrepreneurial and special, out the window, gone, basically. I could talk about that, each of these points, for hours on end. And number 4 really rolls into this. Confiscation of private property of all emigrants and rebels. Now let me remind you that the Working Men's Association, or the First Internationale, who were the people that were asking Marx and Engels to write the Manifesto, the people that were hiding in London, fleeing from Germany. Marx himself had been banned from France, banned from the place he was born in Germany, right? Hiding in London, he was banned from France, hiding in London until the end of his days. And he is suggesting, when him and all of his friends who were hiding in buildings, which I've documented in the past, they were having communist meetings in Soho and so on in London. He's suggesting, when technically an emigre, the definition of an emigre, I wrote it down here, person who leaves their own country to settle permanently in another. But an emigre isn't a banned person that's settling abroad. An emigre tends to be someone who shows their passport, they've saved up, they're doing it legally. They're not on the run, being funded by outside entities. So the point here is, Karl Marx himself is an emigre, and what's more, he's a rebel. So I'll read this again. Confiscation of property of all emigrants, right? So not immigrants, emigrants and rebels. The people that were behind the Communist Manifesto were on the run, and they had emigrated, but not at the choice of the populace. So is it immigration? The language being used here is so manipulative. It's a way of it's like someone runs up to you and says, the man down the road just stole my wallet. And as he looks over your shoulder, you put your hand in his pocket and steal his wallet. That's what it's like. Number five. Right? So we know what internationalism is. We know what globalism is. Centralization of credit. Credit, obviously, whatever you want to decide is going to be money, whether it's cash or prawns, you know. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state, right? And as we know, Marx and Engels would say that the state is evil because of its capitalist tendencies and its authoritarian nature. This really makes a hypocrite out of the pair of them. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. He's not even pretending at this point. All of his babble in the likes of Capital and Engels' many books, they can say what they like, trying to give humanistic arguments, but this is where it falls back on. This is the truth, right? So I'll read that again. Number 5, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. An exclusive monopoly, he's not even trying to say there's going to be some sort of egalitarian system there. He's not even pretending. So he's suggesting this idea which hadn't been tested yet, runs the show, destroys everything which has worked before it. Number 7. This is great. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. Once again, this goes back to destroying the petty bourgeois or bourgeois in general. The idea of people that make money. People that aren't dependent upon the industry, which would become ultimately the government. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of soil generally in accordance with a common plan. What are wastelands to a communist? or to an internationalist, because the evil of capitalism at its height is the same as communism. They're the same people behind both. Marx was completely funded top to bottom by the highest end of capitalists. Engels was a major capitalist who had major factories in the cotton industry, capitalizing from capitalism itself. When it says here, they're bringing into cultivation of wastelands. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean our green and rolling hills? Does that mean our quaint villages and towns? What does it mean by cultivation of wastelands? Because in their eyes, when they say something, it doesn't quite mean what it says in the tin, does it? So maybe I'm being cruel and they actually mean wastelands, but I wouldn't bet money on it. And the improvement of the soil, generally in accordance with a common plan. Number 8, equal liability of all to work. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Basically, we don't need a class system. We don't need you to worry about what you're good at. We'll worry about what you're good at. Don't worry about the things that might make you impressive for your family, for your people, which might represent the nation. Throw all that to the side. We've got a job for you. Take this broom. You're the official broom technician. But what are you talking about? I'm studied in advanced science. No, don't worry. You're the new broom technician. Off you go. Lots of brooming to do. Take care. So where was I? Was I on number 9? Combination of agriculture. Yeah. No. Number 9. Combination of agriculture and manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by a more equable distribution of the populace over the country. So it's quite well known that communism is no fan of the idea of a nation, of specific sets of identity. It likes the idea of international egalitarianism, as I mentioned earlier. So this is saying it doesn't want to distinct between a town and a country. Now, in England, Scotland, France, many places, Italy, their towns are so unique and fantastic that the thought of wiping them all away and making them all like a modern town, because here's where capitalism really comes into communism. Modern capitalism allows every place to look identical. So if I go to France in 10 years, it's going to look like East London. It's not going to look like France. Same as if I go to Prague or anywhere else, it's not going to have its indicative features of that culture. It's going to instead look like home. I might as well not go. And that's what this is. So capitalism can lead to the aims of communism. And communism doesn't want us to have states, identities. It doesn't want us to have family units ultimately, unless they are for the workforce. It doesn't want us to leave things behind. It doesn't want you to be proud of your father or your mother. It doesn't want legacies of your grandfather. It wants all that gone, under the idea of serving the machine. And number 10, this really is the killer. Because at first they try and, this is the first point where you're going to think, oh, that's nice. But then wait. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labour in its present form. Present form, not abolition of children's factory labour, but in its present form. And then this is where it gets even more interesting. Combination of education with industrial production. So you just said you're going to stop child labour, except you're going to combine education with industrial production. Sounds like paternalism to me. Those that don't know what paternalism is, it was a communistic regime where the factory owner would own everything about your life in return for a job and a roof. And he would literally separate you from your children if he wanted to. They'd be housed or schooled separately. I wrote the definition down of paternalism, one sec. Paternalism, the policy or practice on the part of people in authority of restricting the freedom and responsibilities of those insubordinate to or otherwise dependent on their supposed interest. Now, that's ultimately what is being referred to here. The idea of children becoming, if you look up families like the Greg's family, they were heavily into paternalism, and they would separate the children, they would have their own education. And if I was to be particularly unfair, I would suggest that where it says free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labour in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, to me that looks like a clever way of saying your children don't need to excel, and we've already seen that from the previous points. They don't need to excel, they need to do what they're told to do, and they will be educated in how to help the communist regime in industry. That's it. And these 10 points here are to be found in chapter 2, Proletarians and Communists. It's clear as day. You don't need to take my word for it. You don't need to debate communists on it. You don't need to read hours and hours, years of Marx and Engels to see the fundamental points in which they're making. They're right there, because they can't expect every Tom, Dick or Harry to go through all of their literature. Yes, they'll be lectured to by their professors or by Marxist people, Marxist characters. But these are the fundamentals in which people need to understand.